So I know this thing's been done quite a bit already. I thought it would be a good idea to make a video about this because for some time I had been trying to think of ways to really explain some of this stuff to people, at least the way that I see it. Of course, everybody's going to have their own take on generative AI and what it's going to do to different industries. So, obviously I don't know that these things will be right, but, they're based on predictions of things I've seen quite a bit in my life. I lived through the original internet bubble, which of course now the internet is one of the biggest things in the world, if not, I guess, the biggest thing, however you want to say it. But, originally it did have a huge bubble burst and it destroyed a lot of different businesses and people's lives at the time. Now, I think that AI will react differently with its bubble burst, but that's something that I'll get to later on. I think probably first thing to start off with is the real harm that it's doing, because I don't think that what it's actually doing is quite what people think it is. Again, this is really just kind of opinion based and whatnot, but so everybody's afraid of either their intellectual property being stolen, and rightly so. It's not something I really worry about too much. I don't think anybody really cares too much about what I'm doing. I don't think anybody's out there ripping me off, probably. But I think that part of it is important so that something legally can be done about it, because lawsuits, really a copyright infringement, is going to be what gets something done about it, if anything does. So I don't think that's really as much of a thing to worry about as people think it is, except for the bigger name artists. But I think the real harm that's being done with it is artists losing credit because people who don't appreciate AI, like ourselves, most artists, and I try to be careful about how I say that and say most real artists, like, then I'm so sick of debating things like that, so I don't want to say something like that. But anyway, basically, like, I think that the people who are against AI art are going to give a lack of appreciation to AI art, and then we start getting to a place where people can't tell the difference. That's where you see the real harm, because people are seeing this like, oh, this is AI art, I don't want to praise it, give it any likes or credit, but then it turns out it actually is a real artist's work, and so now they're getting hurt by that aspect of it. Now, granted, I don't think we're really at a place where, like, high skill people are getting fooled by that. Like, people that are, halfway decent artists or painters or whatnot, they can see the flaws in AI and what's wrong with it. I mean, even if you're not necessarily, because I see all the time people talking about how, this is so fake, or this is so real, and it's like, yeah, I mean, it really just depends on how you look at it. But a lot of people just aren't seeing the flaws in these things, like, for example, like things being like too flawlessly perfect, especially when it comes to like focal edges and things like that. See, like, AI doesn't seem to understand the concept of focal blur, and I think that's because, well, I mean, honestly, a lot of artists don't. And it's kind of a weird thing for me. I understand it, but I feel like I'm really bad at it. As you'll see in this painting in the background, I do put that to work and kind of try to imitate how the camera would focus on things in this image. I exaggerate it, obviously. That's kind of the point of art, right? So, but the AI doesn't seem to understand that. And of course, you got things like, giving a character like 4 nipples, or like, I don't know, like 10 fingers, like, it just something really, or on 10 fingers without the thumbs, you know what I'm saying? Like, yeah, you got 10 fingers, but I'm saying like 10 regular digits, or like, 3 thumbs. Like, it doesn't even make any sense. You'd think it would be like symmetrical, like, it would double things but too many, like, okay, we got 4 thumbs, but no, it's like complete randomness. And you got the AI supporters that are like, oh, well, it'll get better, they'll eventually, okay, yeah, well, it probably would, but I think there's, again, as I get into this talk, I'll explain reasons why I don't really think that matters that much either. But yeah, so, I mean, point being, though, and I don't think we should be showing any appreciation to this AI art, so I think, reacting that way is the right way to go. It sucks if it's, like, harming some artists, and as long as the companies are leaning into it, it's going to keep causing problems. I mean, with them stealing everybody's art, the only place I still really feel comfortable being on is Deviantart, and of course they did the same thing, but it's like at least they've got some kind of opt-out now, whereas the Instagram version is such a complete pain in the ass. Like, they randomly send you an email after going through a bunch of bullshit paperwork, and then you basically have like an hour to respond to it. I mean, you know, like, what if you're at work or you're busy or you just didn't see it? Like, that's, I mean, yeah, your phone can send alerts and stuff, but like the likelihood that you're going to be, you know, free to do that, and from what I've heard, it's a similar pain in the ass for Adobe. You know, they just got in trouble for charging like basically a year's worth of fees for backing out of Creative Cloud. Not to mention their generative AI nonsense where they're stealing stuff from people. So I guess maybe that's a good time to lead into the AI bubble burst. They are saying that it's already happening, and the thing with that is like people can kind of make it happen. That's how the stock market works, right? So like, I don't mean that people are intentionally trying to like crash the AI market, but what I'm saying is if the investors and the speculators are looking at this and going, okay, this thing is gonna be a giant, you know, pile of crap and it's going to lose everybody a bunch of money, and they take their money out of it, then that makes that come true. Like, you know, they're afraid it's going to crash, so they make it crash. Again, not intentionally, it's just everybody gets out and they take their money, and, you know, and again, I'm no stock expert, so, you know, take what I say with a grain of salt. But supply and demand and investment are pretty straightforward. So once those companies go bust on AI and they stop investing in it, then you'll stop seeing them steal the data the same way, because they have no benefit to it and they're basically just wasting money. I saw a results of a study recently that were saying that workloads have increased something like, I think it was 77% ever since AI was introduced. So, you know, the whole idea of AI was to make the workloads smaller, but apparently now, because there's so much AI hype and people developing AI products, they've actually increased their workload like by, I don't know, almost double. That's just insanity, really. A lot of these companies have already lost a lot of money on it, including like even the biggest companies, like the big G. Let's say anything bad about them on YouTube. No, I'm just kidding. I don't care. But yeah, so I mean, they're already saying that it's happening, and if they're saying it's happening, there's a good chance that the investors are going to cause it to happen, like I was just saying. We've seen this happen in the housing market repeatedly. 2008, happening now, happened in China not too long ago, where they had a giant crash. I forget the details of what they were. I think they were building like really crappy quality buildings that were almost like the episode of Simpsons where the mafia forces the school to like renovate with using mafia labor, but it's like done with all cheap, crappy products that just falls apart. And then I forget where they have to get money from. I think Mr. Burns. I don't know, but anyway. So then let's go ahead and move on here. I don't want to run out of time babbling about, you know, one or, you know, more different topics more so than the others. Sorry, I'm kind of tired today, so my speaking is not really, like, I've got, you know, bullet points here to keep myself on track, but like as far as, you know, just eloquently speaking, not great today. Anyway. So again, since I already touched on the, you know, it'll be good one day aspect, I want to explain that, first of all, this technology, or whatever, the math for this has really, it's kind of like ray tracing, where it's been around forever. It's just they didn't have the, like, the computational power to make it happen. Like, the math has existed for a long time. Just like, you know, we're just now getting into ray tracing, and we're still barely doing it, using a bunch of, like, tricks and stuff to make it really possible. Even path tracing is still so like out of touch heavy, it's crazy. I mean, you have a pretty good NVIDIA GPU and try to like actually run something like Portal RTX at like, you know, just even a native 1080p, and it just crushes your GPU. It's crazy. So this is not real AI is what I'm getting at. Like, this math has been around forever. We've been calling it AI forever. It's not real AI. It's not actually imposing any kind of free will, or actually, like, you know, I guess they're saying some of them are sentient, even like LLMs. You know, every week or so I see a new, like, oh my god, this is the best thing ever. This is gonna change everything. Midjourney is the fucking best now. Like, no, uh, like, it's always some like little gimmick thing, and it really isn't like intelligent enough to think like a person. It can only, as we've said before, copy based on training language models. That's why one of the reasons why it makes so many mistakes. And here's the thing, I do believe that one day AI could be good enough to actually do this stuff on the level of a human, but it would never be accessible to the average person. That's one of the things I never see anybody talk about in any of these, you know, art AI talks, whatnot. Real AI would probably be like Terminator level dangerous stuff that could actually, or, you know, Lawnmower Man, where, you know, his consciousness actually infects the internet itself. That's kind of like the ending of the movie if you didn't get it. I mean, I think it's pretty obvious. I don't think they really like buried the lead on that too much to where you don't get what happens at the end. But you know, sorry for spoiling a movie from 1994, but basically at the end of it, you know, Job transfers his consciousness into the internet. He becomes like pure energy. He essentially uploads himself into AI, and kind of, I guess they imply that he takes over the internet, because I mean, he tells Dr. Angelo earlier on, you know, exactly what he's going to do. He tells him his whole plan, and he's like, when I, you know, become a pure consciousness and take over the internet, you'll hear every phone on Earth ring at the same time. And they show that happening at the end of the movie, because you can't, like, it's kind of nebulous what happens for a minute. Nowhere near a level of like Akira. But you kind of like, you're like, oh, I think he stopped him, and then you hear all the phones ring, and it's like, oh okay, no, that's bad. But yeah, so I think that's, you know, the reason why we would never see people be able to actually use that for art, because only really, really big responsibility corporations and governments would have access to things like that. It would be too dangerous for the average consumer to have control of something that is on the internet, could take over things on the internet, and has the, you know, thinking power of a person, but with the speed of a machine. Like, it's too dangerous. Or at least that's how I would see it. So, okay, so moving on beyond that idea there, going on to like the idea that artists could be replaced by all of this stuff. That's not happening. Sorry, it's just not. So, for multiple reasons. First of all, most of this AI art is quite low quality. And again, as I said before, some people argue and be like, oh no, look how good this looks, but they're getting fooled by that stuff. They're just not, I don't know, they haven't analyzed that kind of thing enough to really like understand why it looks fake and bad. Again, like I said before, the, you know, focal blur is one of the things. Like, it doesn't understand how to treat edge work. But again, there are a lot of artists that really are like that too. And as I said, I struggle with it myself. Like, sometimes I just don't like the way it looks when I do it, and so maybe I just need to work on like the tastefulness of, you know, getting it right. But that's exactly what it is right there. It's like the logic of where you make these choices. It's hard to just look at a bunch of pictures and reason why they're doing the things they're doing. If it really was, then everybody would just be able to look at the greatest art of all time and imitate it instantly. Really well trained and studied artists, of course, that kind of is what they do, but they can do it because they've studied so much. I mean, it should be pretty obvious, but I'll say it just in case it needs to be said. So with this stuff being like super low quality, like, okay, let's say like all the artists did quit, regardless of what the art is, then if all the artists quit, then AI would have nothing to train itself on except for other AI generated art. I mean, well, you know, the stuff the humans made before they quit would still be there, but again, it would just keep regurgitating itself. AI would train on something real, then AI would train on the AI trained stuff, and then it would just all become, I don't even know if it would just start generating more mistakes. I think it probably would be less mistakes, but I think the art would just be like super generic. I think color schemes would get copied a lot because of the way that like image searches work, where it basically just like looks at all of the colors in the image and just kind of builds histogram and goes, okay, this has this, you know, kind of common colors, just like this other image does, maybe even in similar areas of the aspect ratio of the image. So let's say like maybe like, oh, okay, well this picture has more like blue in the top right corner and this one has more green in the bottom left corner. So something sort of to that effect. But yeah, I think it eventually it would become so horrible that like everybody would just, I mean, I don't know, everybody would basically just kind of come back to where they were before that happened. But I mean, that's never going to happen. All the artists are not going to quit. Then you've got things like boycotting, like I was talking about earlier, in the part where it's hurting artists and stuff like that. Companies would kind of start to, I think, eventually feel the sting of people refusing to deal with AI art. Now, you saw a similar thing with them replacing cover arts with CG, and unfortunately, that didn't really work out the way we had hoped, where, you know, they'd kind of stop using so much CG, because I mean, my god, some of the generic cover arts for games, and that really is what makes me look at a game when I'm going through the marketplace and then, you know, there's a bunch of generic CG crappy looking cover arts. Like, I just don't even care about looking at those games. If I hover over it and maybe the preview window video is something really good, then, you know, that's cool. But um, like, I might look at it. And of course, there are plenty of times when I see something that has a great cover art and the game just looks awful. So, but hey, at least it got me to look and see, right? So yeah, I mean, protesting may not actually do any good, but I think really the bubble is what's gonna, you know, make them stop. And then you've got, of course, lawsuits and stuff. Like, there's a whole section of this I could go into music and how you know, it's affecting AI and all that kind of stuff. But really, I think like, so Carla Ortiz and some other artists had a lawsuit going. I don't know really, you know, what's going on with that. There's probably plenty of videos about it, so I don't really probably need me jumping into that and trying to figure out whatnot. There's something similar going on in music where there's most of the big record labels are suing over AI music. I really didn't think anything was going to get done about that in art because we didn't have big corporations behind us, which, I mean, really, if anything, in art, it's going the other way around where the big corporations are working against it. And really, don't get me wrong, the music companies are still trying to screw over artists. It's just, you know, they're trying to stop the AI thing. But yeah, so, I mean, really, we could see a lot of companies start to abandon it pretty fast once they realize it's not making them any kind of money, and when they see, like, how irritated or angry it gets people. Unfortunately, a lot of artists probably will quit out of fear of it, really. I think it's probably going to be demoralizing mostly to those who are more like beginners and like really, really new to it. And sometimes it goes the other way around. Like, sometimes the beginners are the hardest ones to get to quit because there's still, you know, it's more interesting and you haven't gotten sick of doing the thing. I know I've gotten really burnt out on it, and it gets really frustrating just feeling like you're not really doing any good artwork. It's addictive at first when you surprise yourself. It's kind of like doing physical sports and stuff, especially like, you know, action sports like skateboarding, surfing, snowboarding, all that. You see some guy do some crazy trick in a video, and now one day you're doing it, and it's like, oh my god, the feeling of accomplishment, right? So that's going to be my other thing, one of the biggest things I want to talk about, where I don't think that it's going to catch on nearly to the degree that people think it is. It's the cultivating of skill. Like, just think about, like, even if you are still a fairly new artist, or if you're a very experienced artist especially, think about how much time you've spent doing this thing already, and think about like how much more time you will spend over the course of your life. There's a lot of engagement to be had with that. It's what keeps you interested, right? It's not just, drawing or painting. It's the, studying anatomy and colors and just all this different stuff and photography. There's so many different multifaceted things to it that you could really just keep busy with, honestly, pretty much forever. Typing a prompt into a generator does not have that same type of engagement. There's nothing about going, make a picture of Sagat from Street Fighter throwing a fireball in front of the statue in his level in Thailand. I mean, this isn't the greatest painting ever. It's not, anything special. I probably should have put more stuff in to, kind of make it look more detailed, but this was a really quick painting. I wish I had recorded more of it, but a lot of times I just honestly am not too confident in how things are going to turn out, so I don't always record stuff. There have been plenty of times when I, recorded a painting and it turned out really badly and I just ended up scrapping it, which, that definitely sucks. But the the risk and reward program, I mean, with the AI, like, that's just not there. It's like you type it in, it comes out. If it looks bad, you just type up another one. Most of these guys don't even bother to like name the images. It'll just be some random like assortment of letters and numbers that looks like a bit.ly link or something. There's no like, yeah, there's no risk and reward. I mean, it's not, entirely like this thing is like gambling, but that is part of, I think, part of the addiction of it. And what is kind of like good about art is that whole thing of like, yeah, you're taking a chance on whether, you're wasting your time and effort on this thing, and that kills me a lot of times. That's why I don't do anywhere near as good of art as I probably should, because doing all this complex perspective, and then ended up just making something really bad, it feels like a waste of time, which really, I still got in the perspective practice and work on that, so it's really not, but I can tend to feel like it. I mean, at least this thing has some kind of background to it this time. But the lack of accomplishment and all of that stuff, like, that's, I think, okay, so I skateboarded for years, and you'll tend to hear me mention this at different points because it's relative to a lot of this. I think a lot of people think that skateboarders skate because of some kind of like adrenaline addiction or something like that. It's not at all. There's very few times when I was skateboarding that I got any kind of adrenaline rush. And usually that was doing things I didn't like bombing hills. I skated with some people that were pretty fond of like bombing hills. They're kind of hesh guys. So like, I didn't like doing that, but if you're skating with them and that's what they want to do and you're not the one driving, like, you don't really have a lot of choice. I mean, you could just stand there while everybody else bombs the hill, but that's just about the only times when I've gotten anything close to adrenaline rush. I really, the only things that ever really give me adrenaline rushes are like near miss wrecks or getting in wrecks. So really what it actually is the feeling of accomplishment. Well, I mean, it's fun to do too. It's both of those things. It is fun to ride on the board, and it is really interesting, especially grinds. I always liked grinds. They kind of feel like their own little like amusement park ride because everyone feels a little bit different. A little bit different experience. So, but the feeling of accomplishment plus the actual like fun of, writing. So like all these AI prompts and stuff, they don't have any kind of real feeling of accomplishment. There's no cultivation of skill. There's no like preparation for it. Like, you're not studying. So that just keeps diminishing its quality as far as entertainment value to the person who's actually doing the thing. There's just no, like, there's nothing to keep you doing it really. Now, obviously, there are financial motivations for continuing to do it, but I can't imagine why any company would pay a freelancer to do that when they could just have anyone, literally anyone in the company, type out a sentence. Obviously, they'd have people thinking of what they were going to be generating as far as the pictures and everything. You never know, it could just be some creative director guy who does all of this stuff. So I think really I've hit most of the points that I wanted to talk about there. So I think for the rest of the video, I probably will just talk about kind of random stuff that has to do with AI. And maybe, yeah, probably touch a little bit on the painting since it's playing back in the background here, but probably won't talk too much about that as I don't want to go really off topic or whatnot. So one of the other things I would talk about, like, as recording videos, since that kind of is already relevant to this for both reasons, obviously. I think one of the reasons why I started recording video lately is just in case of any type of accusations of AI or anything like that. Not that anybody has really, I mean, I don't really hear much back from anybody about art, so I'm not super worried about it. It's just kind of like, it's not really hurting anything and it takes very little effort. You just press a button and it records the video. Obviously, editing them and doing stuff like this takes a little more effort, but it really still is not too much. I mean, I'm just sitting here talking. And the editing part of it is not too bad, at least not, you know, for my stuff. Definitely editing video can be a ton of work. Like when you see those videos where they have some kind of like little meme reference clip every 5 seconds, like those things have got to be a nightmare to put together, like sourcing all of those videos. Sometimes I wonder even how they remember some of that stuff, like references to movies and different TV shows. Like I'm pretty good with remembering references, but holy crap, some of the obscure stuff, just like, oh yeah, I remembered that this one random phrase was going to be in here that I could use for this video. But so you've got a lot of people who are, you know, talking about like these speed paint AI videos now, like, oh yeah, now AI can imitate, you know, speed painting, fake videos, but I mean, I've only really seen a couple of them, but just even without having really seen it, I can tell you just it couldn't imitate really complex techniques. Like workflows where people are using a lot of different, you know, blend modes and stuff like that, and you know, using like interacting with line art in complex ways. I mean, a lot of people, I think, to this day still like paint on top of their line art instead of painting underneath the way that I do, and then like getting rid of the line art. If you've seen any of my stuff, you probably already realized that like this kind of thing in this image with, you know, finished image that still has line art in it is a fairly rare thing for me. I don't do that too often. It definitely is a lot faster. What I could take this thing to a full value painting pretty fast, probably just from where, you know, it is at the end here. I would definitely have to do some silhouette edge work to it. But anyway, interacting with edges in complex ways, like I was saying before, focal blur and things like that, that's a much harder thing to imitate because of like subpixels and stuff like that and different layers. If you look at those speed paint videos, most of them are just fairly simplistic stuff, like we're just putting, you know, some values on like a drawing of a lady or something. Like it's not a fully complex background and stuff like that, but I don't know, we'll see how it goes, because obviously it could train on real people's images, but it's a hard thing for me to really put into explanation, but just from being a digital painter and knowing the way it works, it's hard for me to imagine that thing could imitate it, because it doesn't know the reasons why I'm doing the things I'm doing. And I mean, you know, sometimes there's a matter of experimentation too. Sometimes the artists themselves might not even know, you know, why they got what they got out of it. I'm not saying they don't know why they did what they did. They definitely know why they did what they did, because they were just, like I said, just experimenting with something, just trying to like see where the good colors come from. I mean, I think a lot of people do that with color work, where, you know, you can basically just make like an adjustment to something and then just keep adjusting it until like, oh, okay, now it looks good, which, you know, I thought years ago that that was a good method, and everybody uses it to some degree. It's definitely helpful, but it's not as helpful as you would think. There have been a lot of times where I've used that idea and just still never could come up with anything that I liked. It typically happens with background colors. Like I'd say, you know, sometimes we'll do those character-based images where it's just a character and we've got just some random assortment of colors in the background. I tend to do those a lot just for quick, you know, fan arts or whatever, just for, you know, for fun, something to paint. And definitely start trying to get more into doing real perspectives. It is a pain in the ass. It's not so much that I don't know how to do them, it's just more of like, they can be frustrating because you can do a lot of work and then it still end up with something really bad looking. And as I learned when I studied some compositional stuff, that a lot of times perspective can work against your composition. It can make things really, really difficult because of the shapes that it creates. And then if you want to make shapes that look good, then you have to break the perspective, and then you have to, it's really, really frustrating. You kind of have to like experiment with the shapes during the perspective stage to kind of try to estimate. Like it's not fun, especially with 3-point, and 3-point's complicated. Or at least if you're doing it at a high level, like just doing a 3-point triangle, yeah, that's not anything super complex. But if you want to measure out like cone of vision and actually do like diagonal vanishing points and stuff like you would in a complex 2-point, it is a giant pain in the ass. It requires a good bit of trigonometry stuff, even at the very beginning stages. I mean, it literally almost is like straight up trig, because you're measuring radians and you're setting up a triangle. You're basically finding theta, and then you're finding the midpoints in between each like volume of the triangle. So it's pretty weird. But I mean, it's one of those things, like, it's complicated, but once you know how to do it, it's the same process pretty much every time. It's not something you can just like paste in. I had the idea. So this was basically my idea, was that you could set up an equilateral triangle, find the diagonal vanishing points for it, and then warp it into whatever proportion triangle you wanted it warped into, and that it would basically like appropriately move the DVPs to where you needed them to be. And no, that does not work at all. It warped them to the wrong place, and basically, so I mean, it just, yeah, it screwed everything up. So there's not really, as far as I can tell so far, not any real shortcuts. There are shortcuts over doing it like physically with real measuring tools and stuff like that, because you don't actually need a compass to do it. I do have a set of like digital tools that I specially set up to basically to like help me measure all this stuff. And it's, when I say tools, it's basically, it's just a file that has a bunch of different like shapes in it that I can warp and stretch to what I need them to be. So like a triangle that's divided at 45 degrees, so that, you know, when I set up a grid for 2-point perspective, it's got the diagonal vanishing point in the center wherever it appropriately should be. Because with that one you can, because you're not warping, you're only rotating. So in that case, it actually does stay where it should, and you can use it as kind of a, it's not, again, not a shortcut, because with real traditional tools, you're doing the exact same thing. The edge of the triangle measures out that same place. So then the ones I use for 3-point are actually a bunch of like circles that are divided up in different ways. And some of those are for my schematics for like perspective drawings, most specifically like cars and stuff like that. You can use those circles a lot in cars, or actually in any place where I need a cylindrical object. I can take, like, say like I've got a circle that's X'd up, and you can basically use that to like fit it inside of a box in perspective, and now you've got a circle in perspective. So now I need like a pillar or something like that. Well, now I can, you know, bring up that pillar out of the, basically like extrude it out of the ground, kind of. Anyway, not to dwell on that for too long, but that's just a kind of like an example of what I'm saying about how it's, when you're doing stuff like that, it's pretty hard for the AI to imitate those kind of things, because how's it going to, from the ground up, imitate your perspective, colors, everything? It would just be, I don't know. I think it would make a hell of a lot of mistakes if it tried to do stuff like that. And typically, the reason why I don't record that part of it is because, I mean, I don't think most people would care to see that. I see a lot of people kind of tend to run from perspective. It's not something to be scared of. It's a lot of math, but like once you understand it, it's actually not that bad to do. Or, well, sorry, I mean like there's not as much guesswork. Like once you figure out, and if you learn the techniques for like kind of like thumbnailing it, I've got a book that has a really good technique for thumbnailing out, kind of like winging your perspectives to try to figure out where the vanishing points are going to be in your sketch, so that you don't have to keep, like what I was saying earlier, and just like keep redoing the 3D draft over and over again. Oh, sorry, when I say 3D, I just mean like, you know, it's rendered in like 3 dimensions, not like actually using 3D software. I'm just talking about like, you know, like an architect would draft out a technical drawing with his tools or whatnot. So I don't think, I mean, you know, obviously AI can analyze like 3D for perspective, because I mean, that is kind of like the biggest thing about 3D software, is it being able to understand perspective. But I'm just saying, like, the combination of all of that stuff, and also it's used to filling volumes, not actually doing line art. That is, but again, I mean, I'm sure it could eventually get to that point. I really do think that that could happen, but it falls under the like random average person wouldn't have access to this kind of software. Um, So eventually, though, I think we will start to see this thing, and probably not too much longer here, start to see it kind of die off as people lose interest in it and kind of start to move on to other things. Also, you got to realize too that the people who are into AI stuff, they're not just into like one aspect of it usually, at least from what I've seen from the videos, you know. So like the guys who are making AI art, they're probably not just making AI art, they're probably also making AI music or like videos, or like there's those guys who do the like fake trailers for modern, what am I trying to say? They're weird as crap. It's always like 80s franchises but modern versions of movies. So like, you know, God, I'm having trouble thinking of one that like hasn't already been done at this point. But let's say if there weren't GI Joe movies already, somebody makes like a fake AI generated GI Joe trailer that is starring modern people. Like it's got, I don't know, like Zac Efron or like I don't know, Emma Stone as Scarlet, like, you know, something stupid like that. It's not as bad and corny as those guys who do the anime music videos with like some song, like it's got like Linkin Park in the background and like Vegeta beating the crap out of people. Like, no, it's not quite that cringe, but a lot of times they come off kind of funny to me, and I do like some of the things they're doing with like in the music zone with AI, and mostly what I mean by that is amp tone models and stuff like that. If you're not familiar or you're not a musician, there's been a lot of stuff in the last few years of like amp simulators, which we mostly use on the computer in DAW to record stuff. But you've also started to see like modelers for like live shows and stuff, which actually, no, those have been around for a long time too, now that I think about it, because the original Axe Effects has been around for a while. And so now then you've got the Quad Cortex, which is Neural DSP's floorboard. They have some really good amp sims. I use a lot of those. I think most people are, you know, consider them to be the best at this point, or STL. There's a lot of really good ones out there. ML Sound Lab is really good, and I've got a number of theirs. In fact, the guy who runs ML Sound Lab and does all their stuff used to work for Neural DSP. So the Tonex is a really awesome piece of hardware. So basically, these things can do imitations of real amps, and they're not perfect, but they sound really close. For me, all I really care about is whether they sound good and whether they sound real. I'm not obsessing over whether it sounds like the real amplifier in real life. I think a lot of the people that use that stuff are just way too picky about whether it sounds like the real amp or not. I mean, you know, yeah, that's great if you can get it to sound like it, but what I really care about is just, can I get a good sound, period. So now we've kind of, it's almost like, you know, the Spotify thing where we just suddenly had access to all this different music that we, you know, we couldn't afford to just buy all this stuff before. You're kind of having that happen with amp sims now, where you're just getting like tons and tons of amp models. I've played models for amps I would have never gotten to try otherwise. And not only that, but can play them whenever I feel like, really. And there's a difference. Like, you've got models and then you've got captures, which, so models are more like a full recreation of the amp and should theoretically react the same way when you change knobs and settings and stuff on it. Whereas a capture is kind of more like a snapshot in time. Like, you know, these were the settings on the amp at the time when I did this. Now, you can alter them after that, but the thing is, it's not always going to react the same way as what the real amp would. And the main reason for this is what they call the Q. And the Q is basically like, it's EQ and it's the width of the adjustment that you're making. I know it kind of sounds kind of weird, I'll explain. So let's say we're changing like the mid-range, like, you know, most just basic amps, the majority of them just have a bass, mid, and treble adjustment. And so basically what the Q is, you know, what defines what's the bass region, what defines what is the mid region, what defines what is the high region. Well, that's what the Q is. It, you know, it tells you where do the mids end and where do the highs begin, where do the mids end and where do the lows begin. And of course, it gets more complicated than that, and most sound engineers, engineers, I don't know, I can't talk. Most sound engineers divide it up even more than that. You have the sub-region, you've got bass, low mids, high mids, and then highs. So some of the other AI stuff we're seeing for production, like things like Ozone, where it basically kind of like AI masters your song for you. They're really interesting. I don't use the AI features. I do use Ozone, but I don't use the AI parts of it for the most part. I guess I mean, I guess technically I am, because I think all of the modules are somewhat AI controlled, but they're not just like auto, you press a button and it does it for you. Now, you can do that with Ozone, but I tried it a couple of times and I did not like the results, and from what I've seen of videos of people doing it online, also got not great results. But I love the stuff that I got from doing it manually. So it's kind of like, I mean, technically, I think it's almost like guided AI, right? So like, you bring up something like, let's say, like the spectral shaper. The spectral shaper is kind of like, in fact, I'll actually probably end up using it on this vocal track to kind of get rid of some of the harsh frequencies and stuff like that. But it works very similar to a plugin called Soothe 2, which is extremely popular. It basically just like tries to find harsh frequencies and cut them out of the mix. So you still have control over it though. Like, you're telling it where to apply these frequencies. So basically it's kind of like the AI tries to do stuff, and then if you don't like what it does, you can kind of, you know, tone it down or control it. Kind of similar to what you would do with like parallel compression, where you mix in little bits of it. So, you know, you crush the crap out of it with the compressor, but then you just mix in a small amount of it, which is a weird and hard to explain thing. You just have to hear it. Generally, it kind of just makes the sound kind of brighter without like hurting your ears. So yeah, there's some really cool stuff going on with like AI helping like with real musicians to make music. It's not, you know, as far as like writing and stuff, but I just mean having a better sound at a lower price. So, you know, why go out and buy like a $3,000 to $5,000 100-watt amplifier just to get the sound that you want? Absolutely nobody needs 100 watts. That's just crazy. You see people that have like, you know, like 800 watts to the subwoofer in their car and stuff. It's like, my God, do you understand how much 800 watts is? That's like playing a giant stadium with like 10,000 people. You don't need that in your bedroom. And back in the early days of playing guitar, I mean, the early days, a long time ago, because the guitar was around a long time before I was into it, but in the 90s when I had first started playing guitar, you know, there was like, if you wanted any kind of decent sound, you needed a giant amp like that. I had the hardest time helping my parents understand that, because when I was about 16, I tried to buy my first like half stack, or, you know, 412 cabinet, which is absurdly loud if you're not familiar. They're stupidly, ridiculously loud. There's absolutely no reason why you need that kind of volume for anything, really. With PA systems like they have and have had for many years, you've honestly really kind of never needed it, except for, like, you know, Monsters of Rock 92, where there's 150,000 people there. Like, maybe for something like that, but you're gonna have a pretty crazy PA system for that kind of show, I would think, anyway. So probably not something you really need to worry about too much. And you have guys like Ingve that have, like, you know, these 10 of these things on stage, and half of them are fake. I don't know. I think I've heard for him, supposedly his were all real, but you don't need any of that kind of stuff, and especially now. So it's nice that the bar for the entry has kind of dropped. And now I've also thought of the concept of, like, if amp modelers and capturers put real companies out of business, then what will the amp models and capturers imitate? I mean, you see, it's all circular. So I don't really see any of that kind of stuff happening anytime soon, where it's just going to completely, like, push people out of the market or anything like that. I don't think it's something to really be afraid of. You really just kind of have to, like, take it in stride, wait for it to go away, take any benefits you can from it. While I see benefits in music, I don't really see too many for art, if any, honestly. Not even for, like, reference or anything. I know probably traditional artists thought of digital artists the same way at the time. It is not at all the same. If you're a digital artist, you know that it is still a lot of time and effort and work and learning. It is nowhere near being a magic button press, but AI literally is that. So anyway, hopefully this talk gave you some good pointers to go by and you feel a little better about the whole thing.